Hello, folks. Welcome back to English 200. This is a video lecture on Module 3, which will contain quiz number 3 based on the Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh. That quiz is due this coming Monday, September 6th. So I'll be using the text itself and referring here to essay number 1. Essay number 1 is not due until September 27th, toward the middle of the semester, but I bring it up because there are at least a couple of questions here, 1 and 2, that relate to the Epic of Gilgamesh and or the Hebrew Bible, which we've already discussed. So you should have already taken quizzes 1 and 2 on part 1 and 2 of the Hebrew Bible, and some of the information, slides and whatnot that we discussed in those two modules 1 and 2 will be referred back to again for this Epic of Gilgamesh Tablet 11. So let's see here. What you guys see in Moodle is this, roughly, the modules. And so I'm referring here to Tablet 11, quiz number 3, coming up this Monday, September 6th. So let me just sign out of Canvas here. And continue. This reading, of course, again, if you just click on the link in Module 3, you'll get this text. The reading is taken, a scan from the Norton Anthology of World Literature, Volume A. Unfortunately, this scan came from the library, the Grambling State University Library's copy, and someone, not sure why, they numbered all of the lines of the introduction. A little irritating, but you can still, read the 2 columns as they are. So the Epic of Gilgamesh, notice they say here CA or C is the abbreviation for the Latin phrase circa or approximately. So circa 1900 to 250 BCE. Remember that BCE is not BC, before Christ, but BCE is before the Common Era, which is typically how historians, literary scholars, archaeologists now date things in ancient times. Speaking of ancient times, this text comes from ancient Mesopotamia. We talked about that last time in relation to the Bible and the origins of Genesis. Another name for Mesopotamia is the Fertile Crescent. The story of Gilgamesh, or earliest versions of it, appear around 2100 BCE. So remember, 2100 BCE would be before 1900, because the higher the number goes, if you think of a left to right chronology, the further to the left or further back in time you go, if you're talking BC or BCE. There are a number of slides in your slide folder. Remember, if you just click on that master link in the syllabus right here underneath the images of the books, if you just click on this, it'll take you to our entire Google Drive folder, in which you have, not only the essay documents and guides like I just referred to, but you also have of course, all of the texts in order in which we will read them, cover them, And then you have the individual folders of slides. So we're going to be talking about the Gilgamesh slides. And remember, for those of you who haven't seen these video lectures before, that in Google Drive, this little button right here off to the right allows you to toggle between this right here, what is called a list view, like a directory or folder in a computer, or a grid view, sort of like tiles, if you will. So we're going to be looking at these tiles, but it's easier for me to use these on my computer because I can zoom in on images and whatnot. So here are the slides. And I'm going to highlight a couple of important points, if you will. This is the set of pages that form a chronology in the back of the Norton Anthology. And so it's these books here, right? This is where we're getting our texts from, the Norton Anthology of World Literature, volume A, B, and C. We're only doing portions from each volume, obviously not the whole thing. But in the back of each one of these volumes is a set of, what do you call it, chronological tables. And so whenever there is something here in gray, it's a context, historical context, and that there's something in black, it's an actual text. So an important context for us is the appearance circa or around 3000 BCE of Sumerian cuneiform writing. That's how you pronounce that, not cuneiform, but cuneiform writing. And I'll show you what it looks like here in a moment, but this is one of the earliest forms of human writing in terms of communication. It actually appears roughly about the same time as Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, but in a different region, right? So Egypt is technically in the northeast corner of the continent of Africa, and Sumeria would have been what is present day Iraq, and therefore the Middle East or the Asian continent. So there's also down here around 2700, Gilgamesh is a king in Uruk. So he was in fact a real historical king. In the epic, he is lauded or portrayed, characterized as a demigod, like half king, half god. But he was a historical king. We have records of him and lots of statues commemorating his reign. So continue here to the next slide, next chronology. So around 1900, circa 1900, is the earliest appearance. And notice here that it's in italics, meaning that that's the story, not the king himself, but the story of the king and his adventures. And so that's the first time that we have evidence that it was written down in any form. And down here, at the same time, circa 1900, Hebrew migration from Mesopotamia begins. So the Hebrews, otherwise known as Jews, begin to migrate from the same area or region of, present day, say, Kuwait, lower eastern, southeastern Iraq, in between the Tigris and Euphrates River, eventually westward to what is present day Israel. And there's a map that I showed you in the first video lecture about this that I'll refer to here again, but it's kind of important to think about this happening at the same time, that the Jews living in the same region of what we would call Sumeria or Acadia or even Babylonia, referred to in the Bible, is kind of important because it begins to help explain perhaps how and why the tablet 11 of Gilgamesh, the story of tablet 11, appears almost kind of identically in a later work called Genesis. And moving to the next slide, there's nothing for us. This is about Hindi and other religions that don't affect Gilgamesh. And this last, I think, slide here shows us that around 1200 BCE, because down here at the bottom, you can see here that these are all gradated, if you will, in BCE categories. That around 1200 BCE, we finally have the definitive or version of the Epic of Gilgamesh that we now have in print. And roughly at the same time, Moses leads the Jews in the Exodus from Egypt to Palestine. Remember the parting of the Red Sea away from Pharaoh. But also recall that, as I mentioned in video lecture 1, that Moses is believed to have been responsible for the first 5 books of the Bible, which of course includes Genesis, which in turn includes the story of Noah and the flood. So the last in this chronology that's important to us is that around or circa 1000 BCE, parts of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible become to be put together or assembled. So, you know, the story of that appears, and we're only reading one portion, tablet 11, the story that appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh is much, much older than the Old Testament itself. This is just a chronology to give you a sense of the world's major religions that still exist or still practiced today. So you see here, one of the perhaps longest standing is Judaism. So Sumerian polytheism or Akkadian polytheism that Gilgamesh would have practiced, that's long died out since, as has the Egyptian polytheism. So the oldest still surviving religions, according to this Merriam-Webster chronology, would be Judaism. After that would be Hinduism. All right. So if you are a Christian, right over here, you know, dated from the birth of Christ, year 0, it's one of the world's younger religions. And if you are a Muslim, right here, with Muhammad, it's an even younger religion than Christianity. And we'll come to the Quran next week. So another way of thinking about this or looking at this is instead of left to right, top to bottom. So in this left-hand column, you have Western world religions, so to speak, or in the Western kind of context, as opposed to Eastern, like Hinduism and Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and so on, of the Far East. In the middle here, you have a column of rough dates. So Sumerian polytheism, Sumer with one M, was, again, present day Iraq, basically, what later in the Bible is called Babylonia. And it's a polytheism, meaning multiple gods, as was, of course, Egyptian polytheism. And this Sumerian polytheism is what we encounter in tablet 11 here of Gilgamesh, when you have a bunch of gods like Enlil and Ea and Anu telling Uttanapishtim what to do and how to do it. So like I mentioned a moment ago, you can see that the last two at the bottom, Christianity and Islam, are the youngest religions. This is just a kind of visual to show you here when it says dates and fates. They're talking here about, you know, are you judged? Are you rebirthed? Do you just have death and you don't come back? Or are you immortal, right? It's kind of color coded here, but you can see, you know, in Judaism, you die, You don't necessarily achieve immortality, although there can be said to be immortality for, say, Noah after the flood. He dies, he goes up to heaven, and you could kind of call that an immortality, if you will. But all of these symbols, hopefully you are familiar with. Perhaps you've seen some of them before. Okay, so this is a chronology I'm going to come back to, but I bring it up because it purports to be an authentic, genuine chronology of how old the entire planet is. And you can see it comes here from a website called www.bible.ca, which means Canada, not US, but Canada. And the people who put this together, and there are many people who believe like this, they look strictly and literally at the Old Testament in particular, or the Hebrew Bible, and they date historical events in people's lives based on what it says in the Hebrew Bible. And therefore, according to this chronology, if I just zoom in here a little bit, this is a couple of years old, so you just add 2 years, right? This is now 2021. So according to this, the Earth is not 75, 72, but it's 75, 74, or 7,574 years old, according to this chronology. I bring this up because it complicates our otherwise, kind of accepted understanding of the age of the Earth. So on the one hand, I just showed you that Gilgamesh as a story and Gilgamesh the king were, 2000 BCE, right, at least. And therefore, that's almost, half of this entire, 50, if you add 2 more years to this, it'd be 55, 56 BC creation. Notice not BCE, but before Christ creation. And aside from the Gilgamesh issue, they want to date the flood in this chronology at 32, add 2 more years, so 3300 BC. Aside from that, it kind of calls into question, what do we do with what we call the paleontological record? Paleontology is a study of dinosaur fossils and remains. So the accepted age, if you will, of dinosaurs is that they're not thousands of years old, but they're quite literally millions of years old. So I'm not telling you what to believe or how to believe, but I just need you guys to understand that there are people who do emphatically, undeniably believe that this is the age of the Earth, right? So you can see here, going back to Adam, he lived 930 years and so on, right? Noah, tells us very specifically in Genesis, he died at 950. So if you just, go back in terms of the Old Testament, it will render this for you. They have a note down here at the bottom. I'm not sure you can read this because of the screen, but you can certainly see it in the slides of the Google Drive. It says down here, the Masoretic text chronology from Abraham to Adam was corrupted by Jews in 160 AD at Zippori for, it says, anti-Christian theological reasons. The Septuagint chronology, and the Septuagint is really what they're laying out here, this belief that, the earth was created in 7 days, right? That's, the root of the word sept, as opposed to penta, which means 5. The Septuagint chronology in whole is the original and correct. And they date some other important dates there. So, you're allowed to, again, believe what you believe, but it does not, jive with what many others might have in terms of factual scientific record. So again, in the introduction, it talks about Mesopotamia. This is an ancient text from Mesopotamia. And here, Uruk is where Gilgamesh is from. In the Old Testament, they call this region Babylonian. And the Babylonians, were enemies of the Israelites. So here, Summer, right, is, again, 1M, is the region we're talking about. Akkad or Akkad is another name for this region at a different time. So they're putting all three of the names here that, generally speaking, at various times, it was named different things. And you see the Euphrates and Tigris rivers that are mentioned in Genesis very specifically. This is present day Iraq. Down here is present day Kuwait. Nineveh is important because it not only is mentioned in the Bible in Genesis and the Old Testament itself, but it appears in Gilgamesh as well, and it's still an actual city. So this is a map that appears in the introductory section of part 1 of the Hebrew Bible that I already mentioned. And again, it's the same area. So there's Nineveh again along the Tigris River. Down here at Ur, where Abraham wandered from, you see his dotted line. So he's wandering westward, eventually along the Euphrates to what is present day Israel, but back then known as the land of Canaan, or the Promised Land, the Holy Land. This might be one reason to help explain how it is that Moses, who, as you can see here in this dotted line, comes from what is roughly present day Cairo in northeastern Africa, comes across the Red Sea, parts of the Red Sea we learn, and then they wander with Moses and his brother Aaron for 40 years before they get to present day Canaan. Of course, Moses doesn't make it, unfortunately, but you can see here in all of these wanderings, and there's this trope, stereotype called the wandering Jew, partly because of this. You can see, because of all this wandering in what is present day Middle East, that with Abraham's wanderings and Moses's, there is some possibility that through oral tradition, that is the telling of stories from mouth to mouth, person to person, that we could get the story of the flood in Gilgamesh, an older text, that then later appears in Genesis written by Moses. But think of, if we're sitting in a classroom or in a circle, if you've ever played that telephone game where you whisper something in someone's ear next to you, and then that's repeated around the circle, almost invariably, the story, by it reaches its original teller, is either slightly different or radically different, but it's never really the same. That people change things based on what they hear and how they retell them. And this is the fundamental essence of oral tradition before things are written down. So again, here's present day Middle East. There's where Ur would have been, Babylonia. There's Baghdad, which of course still is the capital of Iraq. There's Nineveh, which still is a city. And then of course, present day Israel. Here's what the Fertile Crescent, right, this kind of green area, or Mesopotamia, would have looked like in another rendition. So here is famously the tablet that exists in the British Museum. And I will just blow this little caption up for you and read it to you. The Flood Tablet. This is perhaps the most famous of all cuneiform tablets. It is the 11th tablet of the Gilgamesh epic and describes how the gods sent a flood to destroy the world. Like Noah, remember Noah comes way after Gilgamesh. Like Noah, Utanapishtim was forewarned and built an ark to house and preserve living things. After the flood, he sent out birds to look for dry land. And so this is a clay tablet. It's really a fragment of a clay tablet, but ancient scholars of Sumerian and Akkadian language have been able to decipher it. So if I zoom in, you'll see that every single little angle chip, like dashes appear to be, lines right here. They form not letters necessarily, but what we would call phonemes, like syllables. And so you can, like hieroglyphics, you can put together what all of these tiny little indentations mean. So this is a piece of clay that, some ancient cuneiform writers chipped in very carefully with their writing or chisels, and then they allowed it to bake in the sun and harden. So this is what cuneiform writing looks like up close. Again, every single line and triangle, if you will, and angle, it means a different sound, and therefore, string it together in a kind of word. So what you're looking at is, one of the earliest forms of human writing ever. It's pretty fascinating that we, as humans, created this ability to communicate in condensed abstract form, but also amazing that we as humans later after this were able to decipher it. And the text here tells us that where is it? It was discovered in the 1800s, right here. This is on page 99, tablet 11. It was only rediscovered in the 1850s when an English explorer, Austin Henry Layard, dug up thousands of tablets from the site at Nineveh. Again, Nineveh, that important city that appears in Gilgamesh and the Bible and still is a city in Iraq. They were later deciphered at the British Museum in London, and when the younger curator George Smith made the stunning discovery that this epic contained a version of the biblical story of the flood, which had hitherto been considered unique to the book of Genesis, this challenged conceptions about the origin of biblical narrative, which, I understand a lot of people don't want to talk about or accept. They want to say, no, this is the word of God, and therefore it's divine text, and it cannot contain any kind of story about a pagan polytheistic religion that occurred earlier. Going back to those images. So this is one of many statues commemorating Gilgamesh. And he is, holding a lion, right? Many parts that we're not reading. The lion represents his courage, but also there's an episode in it with a character named Enkidu where he, counters a lion. But he's also holding, as you can see, a serpent or a snake. And this does, in fact, the serpent appear in tablet 11. So as you can see here, and so this is just a diagram of the statue, but this is an actual carving of one of many statues. So this was commemorating the real historical king Gilgamesh. And then on one of many statues, there's this plaque here that describes the epic. It says, I'll just read it. Gilgamesh, Assyrian king of Uruk during the 3rd millennium, so therefore 2000 instead of 3, 2000 BC, should be BCE, but is part God and part man. He sets out on a quest to seek immortality. In the course of his quest, he finds compassion, friendship, courage, love, and peace. In the 19th century, therefore 1800s, Sir Austin Henry Layard found clay tablets recounting the epic of Gilgamesh in Ashurbanipal's 8th century, therefore 700 BC library at Nineveh, again Nineveh. This epic, one of the oldest written stories, is the basis of many myths, legends, and tales, including modern ones. So that is the end of the slide section for now. Let me return to the text. And it says here right below that the Epic of Gilgamesh took shape many centuries before the Greeks and Hebrews learned how to write, and it circulated in the Near East, meaning what we call the Middle East, and Levant, which is a kind of older word for countries and regions surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, long before the book of Genesis and the Homeric epics took shape. So this scan here only, we're not doing tablet 1, we're only doing tablet 11. So it skips here to tablet 11. In this tablet, you basically have 2 main characters. You have Gilgamesh, and then you have this character, Uttanapishtim. I know it looks like a hard word to say, but it's not. If you just break down the first part, it's Uttanapishtim, Uttanapishtim. And Gilgamesh is wanting to know from his friend, Uttanapishtim, who's now considered a distant one, or one we might think of as being in the heavens, metaphorically being distant. He wants to know, like, how did you get there? How did you get eternal life? He asks him. How did you join the ranks of the gods and find eternal life? So if I were to ask you who is telling the story of the flood in tablet 11, you would not say Gilgamesh, but you would say Uttanapishtim, because it is Uttanapishtim here telling the story to Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh wants to know, how did you achieve immortality? And he tells him. And he says, I will reveal to you, O Gilgamesh, a secret matter and a mystery of the gods I will tell you. And in the introduction, it tells us that because Uttanapishtim is now kind of immortal and distant, if you will, perhaps in what we might think of as heaven, he speaks like a sage or a prophet in this kind of very antiquated, lofty diction. So he's talking about this city of Shuruppak that was set on the bank of the Euphrates, right? And so remember those maps. It's one of the 2 main rivers in present-day Iraq, and also one of the rivers, both Tigris and Euphrates, that are 4 of the rivers mentioned in the Garden of Eden in Genesis. So the great gods result to send the deluge being another word for huge flood, which unfortunately Hurricane Ida just gave southern Louisiana. So notice that it's great gods, plural, right? So again, this is a polytheistic religion, as were the Greeks and the Romans and Egyptians. And all of these different gods are mentioned, Anu and Enlil, Neherta, and Gugi, Ea, and Ea as being the leader of them. So Ea comes and basically gives Uttanapishtim instruction. Wreck house, build boat, forsake possessions, and seek life. Belongings reject and save life, save. Talking this kind of cryptic, clipped manner. But it's in effect what later God tells Noah to do, right? That is, forget everything, build a boat, and save yourself and your family. Take aboard the boat seed of all living things. We have a version of that in Genesis. The boat you shall build, let her dimensions be measured out, let her width and length be equal, roof over her like watery depths. So again, very kind of specific instructions of the ark or the boat that we also get with Genesis. And Uttanapishtim says, I said to Ea, my Lord, your command, my Lord, exactly as you said it, I shall faithfully execute, which of course he does, as does Noah. So they begin to, build the boat, and in 5 days I had planked her hull. 1 full acre was her deck space, 10 dozen cubits. So notice the use of cubits there that we also had in Noah's building of the ark. The height of each her sides, 10 dozen cubits square, her outer dimensions. I laid out her structure, I planned her design. So again, very deliberate, and also a reference to a length of or measurement of units that we had in Genesis. 3,600 measures of pitch. We also have Noah using pitch to seal or caulk, the boat to keep it afloat. And he says, Uttanapishtim, what living creatures I had loaded upon her, meaning the boat, I sent up on board all my family. Excuse me, I sent up on board all my family and kin, just like Noah does with his family. Beasts of the steppe. The steppe is really basically the foothills of a mountainside. Wild animals of the steppe, all types of skilled craftsmen I sent on board. So, family and animals. This craftsman part was not included in the Noah story. And then 6 days and 7 nights, the wind continued. And that number 7 we've had before, right? That God created the earth in 6 days and then rested on the 7th. And in Noah's story of the ark, the same thing occurs, 6 days and 7 nights. The wind continued, the deluge and windstorm leveled the land. When the 7th day arrived, the windstorm and deluge left off their battle, which had struggled like a woman in labor. The sea grew calm, the tempest stilled, the deluge ceased. Okay, so now we have the end of the storm, if you will. And the boat had come to rest on Mount Nimbush. Mount Nimbush held the boat fast, not letting it move. And the story of Noah, if you will, he lands not on Mount Nimbush, but on Ararat. So it's an actual place. And, you can see that it's pretty high. And if you have a flood, then of course the nearest body of land, if you will, would be the mountaintops as that's what creates islands, right? And so, right, it is described here in Genesis 8:4 of being where Noah lands, and the ark rested on the 7th month. right? Anyway, so not Mount Ararat, but Mount Nimbush and Gilgamesh's 11th tablet. And Uttanapishtim says, when the seventh day arrived, I brought out a dove and set it free. So if you recall, on the second video lecture, we talked about the story of Noah and the flood. And the dove is actually the last bird or creature that Noah sends out. He first sends out the raven, which of course is opposite in color of a dove. Typically a raven is jet black, and a dove can be either, kind of a tawny brown color, or it can be, what we classically think of as the dove of peace, a white dove. But here, remember, the story is much older than Genesis. Here we have a kind of reversal of the birds, if you will. I brought out a dove and set it free. The dove went off and returned. No landing place came to its view, so it turned back. I brought out a swallow and set it free. And a swallow is not at all mentioned in the story of Noah. The swallow went off and returned. No landing place came to its view, so it turned back. And then I brought out a raven and set it free. The raven went off and saw the ebbing of the waters. It ate, preened, like washed itself, left droppings, did not turn back. So that's how Uttanapishtim knows that, okay, there's land, right? Because it was able to eat and it found land, so it didn't need to come back to the boat. But I'd like to point out here that it's a curious reversal that in this version of Tablet 11 or Gilgamesh, that the colors are reversed, meaning it's not the white dove of peace that we find in Noah that brings back the olive branch and is, the one we think of as, the one who sort of saves us, or human beings, right? Right, the dove of peace is typically, construed as white, but it's, the raven that actually wins out, and a raven is generally black. So you tell me, or maybe I'll let you consider why is there this reversal going on, do you think? That in a polytheistic religion, the raven, which is, okay, it's the one that kind of succeeds at, discerning whether there's land or not, but it's actually a dove, whether tawny or white, in Genesis that succeeds. To me, it's a curious reversal. So then Enlil came into the boat, up into the boat. So Enlil, remember, is the leader. The storm has subsided. And this is the moment where he's finally answering the question of Gilgamesh, like, how did you achieve immortality? Leading me by the hand, he, Enlil, brought me up too. He brought my wife up and had her kneel beside me. He touched our brows, stood between us to bless us. Hitherto, Uttanapishtim has been a human being. Now, Uttanapishtim and his wife shall become like us gods. Uttanapishtim shall dwell far distant at the source of the rivers. So this is why he's called the distant one. And we could therefore kind of metaphorically say that Uttanapishtim has achieved immortality, and Noah achieves a kind of immortality when he goes up to be with God when he dies in heaven. So again, two kinds of parallels there. Then there is some discussion about how long is Gilgamesh going to stay asleep. He and his wife, Uttanapishtim and his wife, have this discussion about, well, should we wake him? Should we not wake him? And they're baking a bread of loaf every day that he's asleep. And so the seventh, right? Seventh, again, that number is important. Ever wonder why we have 7 days in a week? The seventh loaf of bread was still in the coals, right? But the important part comes here. He wants to know, once he's awake now, Gilgamesh, where he should go, what he should do, whither should I go? And Uttanapishtim tells him to go seek out this ferryman, basically, Sanabi. So Sanabi was kind of, I mean, I guess the closest analog we might have is later in the Greek religion of Charon, who ferries people across from the living world to the underworld along the river Styx. All right, so Gilgamesh and Ur-Sanami embarked on the boat, right? So Ur-Sanami is basically a ferryman carrying Gilgamesh. And Uttanapishtim said to him again, Gilgamesh, you have come here spent with exertion. What shall I give you for your homeward journey? I will reveal to you, O Gilgamesh, a secret matter. So yet another mystery of the gods. And a mystery of the gods I will tell you. There is a certain plant. Its stem is like a thorn bush. Its thorns, like the wild rose, will prick your hand if you can secure this plant. So he's telling Gilgamesh, Uttanapishtim is telling Gilgamesh to go seek out this specific kind of plant, even though it's not going to be necessarily easy because it's thorny and will perhaps hurt you, if you will. There is a plant in Genesis that can also hurt people. And we've learned that in the Garden of Eden, there was the full name, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It didn't necessarily prick Adam and Eve, but it certainly metaphorically poisoned their innocence and therefore caused them to be cast out by God from the garden. So he goes looking for this plant. Some people want to construe this plant as a cannabis plant. I mean, you can do that. There's no evidence for that. Maybe a reach, but he tied heavy stones to his feet. They pulled him down to the watery depths, that is Gilgamesh to the watery depths. He took the plant, which is in the water, though it pricked his hand. He cut the heavy stones from his feet. The sea cast him up on his home shore. So, he's tired of going, really deep in the water, finding this plant, bringing it up. The ferryman, Sanabi, says the plant is cure for heartache, right? It's actually, as we learn here from this section, a plant that theoretically could help you achieve immortality or become, as it says here, old man has become young again. And, Gilgamesh says, I myself will eat it and so return to my carefree youth. I mean, it's been a common, driving force for human beings for a long time. We're still trying to do it. That is to find the elixir of life, if you will, or reverse aging. So it's, probably as old as human beings have been around that we've been trying to not die. So here it says here, Gilgamesh saw a pond whose water was cool. He went down into it to bathe in the water. So he's in the water, a different pool of water. A snake, here's the serpent, a snake caught the scent of the plant. Stealthily, it came up and carried the plant away. On its back, shed its skin. So now we have the appearance of a serpent or snake in conjunction with a plant. And where else do we have that conflation? In Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, with the serpent appearing in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to Eve. So that's pretty much the end of this tablet 11. And again, one of the potential questions, this is essay 1. One of the, it's not due till September 27th, you know, but you can certainly start thinking about it and ought to start thinking about it in advance. This whole first page is really nothing but instruction, formatting. The second page are potential topics. And the first two are over Gilgamesh or the Bible. The first one says, what accounts for the similarities between the flood story and tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then Genesis of the Hebrew Bible, even though the two are composed over 1,000 years apart. So you would need to explain, okay, what I was just pointing out, like, so what, you know, how, how and why did that occur? True, the story in either one are not identical, but they're similar enough to roughly be the same kind of story. So what accounts for those similarities? Or number 2, in tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, what is the point or purpose of Gilgamesh undergoing a series of trials or tests, which, you know, the, what do you call it? Getting the thorny plant from the depths of the waters, right? That's a trial or test, as we see in the Bible, people being tested. So that pretty much ends this tablet 11 of Gilgamesh. And therefore, you now have the text and the video lecture for this module number 3, the quiz of which is due this coming Monday, September 6th. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, feel free to inbox me in Canvas. Hope you all remain safe. Take care.